Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of To The Point with me, Frank Rausen Pereira, on Rajya Sabha television. Well, the surgical strike carried out by the Indian Army in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir on terror camps there, the second anniversary is almost upon us. And to talk about the surgical strike, the aftermath, and also what's in store for Kashmir and a few other things, of course, I have with me on the program today Lieutenant General D.S. Hooda, former General Officer, Commanding-in-Chief, Indian Army's Northern Command. General, thank you so much for joining me on the program.
Pleasure.
Firstly, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the entire nation and salute you for the surgical strike and the success of the surgical strike.
Thank you very much.
And my first question to you, and straightforward question, what were the circumstances that led to the surgical strike?
See, the situation through 2016 had been deteriorating quite a lot. So, the year started with the attack on Pathankot Air Base, and then 8th July onwards, in the aftermath of Burhan Wani's killing, situation had deteriorated quite a lot, not only within the valley, but we also saw from Pakistan's side attempts to incite violence. Ceasefire violations had gone up, and of course, I think the final straw that broke the camel's back, as they say, was the Uri attack, in which we lost 18 soldiers. And we
was
were clear.
That the last straw, really?
It was, because as I said, things had been building up, and the Uri attack was one of the largest attacks on an army garrison. We lost 18 soldiers, and I think very quickly, it had crystallized in our minds that we need to do something strong, and we need to take some action, which shows our determination and intent that these kind of actions will not go unpunished.
So who was involved in the entire process, General, and when were you roped in, really, or were you part of it right from the beginning?
See, I was part of it right from the beginning. That evening of 18th, the Chief General Sohag had flown into Uri. I had gone with him. And I think at that time our minds was, sort of getting made up that this kind of attack, that we need to do something large. Obviously, starting from the top, the political leadership had to give the final go-ahead. There were officers in the army headquarters who knew. My headquarters, although we kept the numbers small, for secrecy. And finally...
When you say numbers small, I mean how small?
So I would say in the army headquarters, there would be maybe not more than 10 people who knew. In my own headquarters, there were 6 or 7 officers who knew of the operation. And of course, the soldiers who had to go knew, but even they knew only their particular target. So they also didn't know, what the whole plan is and how many targets are to be hit and where all. So we had tried to keep, secrecy so that once the wind gets out of operations like this, chances of success straight away have.
You spoke about soldiers who actually went ahead and carried out this strike. How were these soldiers chosen? I mean, were they together before the strike itself? Was this team pieced together at the last moment? What was the process really?
The soldiers who were involved mainly were from Special Forces, 2 Special Forces battalions. And then there were a few soldiers from the infantry battalions also. As far as the Special Forces is concerned, we had been thinking in our minds, particularly after the Myanmar strike of 2015, that something similar could also be tasked to us in Northern Command. And therefore, there's a need to reorient, train, plan for these kind of operations. So in the winters of 2015-16, we had actually pulled out 2 battalions, the Special Forces battalions, and had put them through a very rigorous program of training. We didn't know the exact targets that we would select finally, but the training had been done, so people had got an idea of what it takes, what sort of planning is required, what sort of intelligence is required to gather information about these training camps in advance. And then based on the final plan that was selected, we did the final selection of soldiers. How many snipers you need, which weapons do you carry, how many recce and surveillance personnel do you need, how many people will you need for the final raid. So based on that plan, the numbers of soldiers were selected. I would say the whole Special Forces battalion is trained for it. So it wasn't as if we were restricted by numbers, that we could only pick up so many people. The 2 battalions were completely trained, so we went ahead.
What is the most challenging aspect of an operation like this?
I think to me the most challenging part of the operation was how do you come back safely. Because when you're going in, the surprise element is on your side. So we were quite confident that we'll be able to get to where we have to get to. But because multiple targets had to be hit and hit at different times, in fact, the first strike went in about 5 to 6 hours before the last strike. And so we were conscious of the fact that after the first strike, the Pakistan Army would get some kind of information that something is happening in the rear on terror camps, and they would warn off their soldiers on the line of control. And that would make the exfiltration or the return to our own area fairly tricky, because now you have soldiers who are alert as opposed to when we had gone in. So to me, that was, I think, the trickiest part of the plan, and that occupied a lot of our attention in terms of what contingencies could come about, what happens if one group gets sort of intercepted by PoK Army, how would you extricate them, what happens if some soldiers are injured. So as I said, getting back safely was
the biggest challenge.
Yeah, it was the biggest challenge.
Bringing back as many boys back home safe as possible.
Yeah. All of them.
Yes, all of them. As far as the control room itself, what was the atmosphere like? What was going through there? What was going through your mind really when the operation was on?
So we were sitting in what we call our command post, and we were watching images of the target area, which were coming to us live. And obviously there was there is a sense of concern that, I hope everything is going to go off well. But honestly, when you are sitting there and, troops are across, there is very little you can do. Now it's up to those soldiers who are across to execute their task. There was nothing that we could do to sort of influence it at that stage. But I think we were quite confident, with the level of training, preparation, planning that had gone on, that things would work out well.
Who else was watching? You said you were watching.
Oh, so I was there, and as I said, there were a handful of 6-7 officers in my staff, mainly the operational and the
MOD as well, whether the images being beamed back to the MOD and PMO as well?
Images were being relayed to Delhi. I am not aware as to who all exactly were watching. In my headquarters, we had operational and intelligence guys, a few of them who were with me.
Talking about the operation itself, was there anything that surprised you? Was there anything that maybe you thought was out of place?
Thankfully, no. Honestly, everything went on as planned, which rarely happens.
Was it too easy, do you think?
It wasn't easy, but as I said, we had prepared well, we had planned well. If anything surprised me, it was the lack of reaction from Pakistan Army. We did think after the first strike had gone in that there would be a little more flutter on the Pakistani side. They were completely shocked.
So the surprise element at the end of the day worked wonders.
It did work wonders, but as a professional army, you would expect some kind of reaction from the PoK Army, and we were surprised that there just seemed to be very little reaction from their side.
And how long did the strike itself last, General?
So as I told you, the whole operation was over one night. Although we had in some places, inserted surveillance groups a day earlier, so that they could keep an eye on the target. The whole operation, as I said, was over one night. But again, between the first and the last, the first strike went in around midnight, and the last went in, I would say, around 6:30 or so.
What was the aim of the strike, and what have we managed to achieve?
This is a question which is often asked. The aim of the strike was twofold. One was to send a clear message to Pakistan Army that you keep supporting this terror activities, and don't think that the Indian Army will not come and embarrass you to a huge extent and expose you for what you are. And the second message was, for the terrorists, that just because you are sitting behind Pakistan Army posts, don't think that you will be safe here and that nobody can hit you. and that, we will only be reactive, you come across on our side, hit our camps, carry out infiltration, and that we will not be able to do anything. That primarily was the message that we wanted to send out. Now, I know it is often said, but Pakistan hasn't stopped activities like this. It was not in our minds that this one strike and suddenly Pakistan is going to mend its ways. The killing of Osama bin Laden didn't wipe out Al-Qaeda, but that doesn't mean the Americans shouldn't have done it. And that's the message that we wanted to send out, that there will be a price to pay every time something like this happens.
What has the outcome been? Have terror groups been impacted the way we would like them to have been?
See, there was a fair bit of, I would say, panic in Pakistan Army posts after the strike had been carried out, because we listen to the radio intercepts and we hear the kind of chatter that goes on across. So there was a fair amount of turmoil in Pakistan Army that such a thing has happened. And on the line of control, moral domination over the other side is extremely important. So that's one positive, that I will take away from there. Terror activities have not really reduced. That is true. But as I said, that it wasn't sort of our aim that this one strike is going to completely wipe out, terror from Kashmir.
You said one strike on quite a few occasions. The army chief, present army chief, is talking about carrying out another strike like this maybe sometime in the near future, saying that we are ready for it. Do we need more such strikes?
See, whether we need strikes or we need some other way of doing things, the fact is we need to put pressure on Pakistan Army. See what is happening today. Diplomacy is sort of almost dead. Nothing is happening. We are seeing continued infiltration. We are seeing continued attempts to stoke up violence in Kashmir Valley. Do we just sit back on our hands and say we can't do anything? So, and when we know that Pakistan Army is directly aiding these activities, so you need to put pressure on the line of control. And putting pressure is by various means, well, targeted firing, some kind of raids, whether you do surgical strikes. So surgical strikes is, one weapon in our overall armory. But I think there is a need to have continued pressure on the Pakistan Army.
Continued pressure on Pakistan Army is something that you're talking about, but let's come back to the strike. As far as this particular surgical strike is concerned, we saw the politicians, play politics, something that they're good at, said that this is not the first time that India has done something like this. Several other occasions where India has actually gone ahead and carried out strikes, such as the one that took place on the 29th of September 2016. Is this something that is routine, or do you believe that this strike on the 29th of September 2016 was unique?
See, it was unique in some ways. It wasn't, and let me just qualify this. So, cross-border strikes have happened in the past. This wasn't the first time. What was unique about it was the scale and scope of it. One, we had not attempted at this scale where you launch multiple attacks starting from across Jammu region to across Kashmir region. It had not been tried out or attempted at the depths to which we went inside. We went in fairly deep. So in that sense, the scale and scope was unique. And the other unique thing was, that the government decided to stand up and say we've done it. That had not been done in the past. Which in itself was a very, very strong message.
Not just that, we also saw, the footage of the surgical strike being beamed to the entire country and the world later. Was that the right thing to do, General?
Well, we can question the timing of...
No, not the timing, but generally, the footage itself to see what our soldiers were doing there.
I believe it was the right thing to do. I believe it should have come out earlier. And the reason why I say this is because soon after the strike was launched, Pakistan went into a complete denial mode and said, nothing has been done, nobody has come across on our area. And I think, to embarrass them further, we should have released the footage after the surgical strike. People question and say, techniques of soldiers are being given out, etc. I myself edited the footage. And we made sure that, things which reveal our techniques, which reveal our practices, if any images which can identify the special forces soldiers, they were all edited out. So all we showed was actually the strike on the terror camps, which I think is fine.
Would you call it the biggest achievement of your military career?
In some ways, yes. It has. It was also very close to my retirement. So it's something that, I remember very fondly.
Icing on the cake, would you say?
I would say that. I would say that.
And let's move on to other things, General, talk about other issues as well, because quite a few aspects of, your role are being debated in the media today. Let's talk about Kashmir, for instance. You served several years there, so I have to ask you this question. We've seen a new phase of terror in Kashmir, where the terrorist organizations are directly attacking policemen, locals, and attacking their families, and that's something that we've seen over the last few days. How do we deal with that particular issue?
It's a big worry. It's a big worry because the police is doing an outstanding job in Kashmir. Not only are they the interface, with the local population, but they're also the ones who give intelligence, etc. And so therefore, if their morale sort of goes down, it's going to be very bad for us. But having said that, I would not call it another phase. I would say it's a new tactics that has been adopted by the terrorists. We'll just have to deal with it, provide greater protection to the police. I don't think that the police force is going to collapse because a few of the men have been killed. So carry on with our counter-terror operations.
It's an alarming trend. So what should our strategy really be?
See, our strategy, there are thousands of people. Some are on leave, some are on, who just go home for a few days, family celebrations, etc. We've seen people being killed. I just think we have to provide them greater security. So there are moves, for example, to move them into safer places. We can look at families, have to be moved out in an area which is more guarded, and when people can go there. Anybody who goes on leave, we've had this in the past. Anybody who goes on leave, informs the nearest post that I'm here on leave, so that when soldiers are patrolling, they make sure they go around the house. So measures can be adopted. I don't think we should think this is going to significantly change in any way, the way the security forces do their operations there.
The fact that Jammu and Kashmir is under governor's rule at this point in time, how does it help the army, or how does it help the security forces? Does it change anything on the ground, really?
Not really, because the doctrine and the tactics and the strategy that is followed by the military pretty much remains the same, irrespective of what is the kind of political dispensation, in the state. So you go on and do your job sort of professionally. If anything changes slightly, it is the fact that, some of the politicking that happens, will not take place. But I don't see the army significantly sort of changing the way it does business.
Another aspect that was widely debated in the media over this week was the fact that talks were first on with Pakistan, then called off. Should we be talking to Pakistan?
See, I always say there's no harm in talking, but there must be some basis on which talks move ahead. If you're going to continually get targeted by terrorists, if Pakistan's support continues, I don't see what is the sort of purpose of these talks. So I think the ball is squarely in Pakistan's court. They need to take some action against terrorism. And I'm sure, India has in the past said, fine, we are willing to talk and, extend its hand of friendship. But if Pakistan is under the impression that by carrying out terror activities, they can somehow pressurize India to come to the negotiating table, I'm afraid that is not going to happen.
Should Imran Khan be given the benefit of the doubt and maybe a chance?
As I said, anybody should be given a benefit of doubt. But if we think there is a new prime minister or a new army chief and some significant changes will take place, I don't think so. You look at General Bajwa. So when he came initially, people said, he's talking peace and maybe it's a good idea. He'll change the ways of Pakistan army. we forget the first day that he took over was the day that attack took place at Nagrota garrison, where we lost 6 or 7 soldiers. Ceasefire violations increased, infiltration attempts increased. So I think, they have to walk the talk.
There are several people who believe that we should open up a dual channel of dialogue with maybe the Pakistani army as well. Are you in favor of that? Do you believe that we should do that?
I am in favor, because if you look diplomatically, things are not going anywhere. We know that there is huge control that Pakistan army has over Kashmir policy and policy with India. Also, every time there's an incident on the border, it is affecting diplomatic relations. So you have Pathankot, foreign secretary talks get called off. You have mutilation of a BSF Jawan's body, and foreign minister's meeting gets called off. So if the border can calm down, I think it will give diplomacy a chance. And borders can only calm down if there is regular meeting, military to military contacts. You are able to do that. I think it's worth an attempt if we enhance military to military contacts.
But the DGMOs do speak and they do meet, General.
The DGMOs speak. They don't meet. The last meeting was in 2013, I think. December 2013 was the last meeting. So that's where we need to go. You see, compare this.
But do you believe that we need to engage at a higher level as far as the militaries are concerned, or DGMO talks are sufficient?
No. See, so let's start at the local level. So we need to have many more flag meetings at the ground level on the line of control, so that we can calm down the situation on the borders. And if the situation on the border calms down, it provides a conducive environment for others. And then, of course, senior commanders on both sides of the line of control could meet up. The DGMOs could have more regular meetings. If there is a scope for exchanges of military education establishments, our officers visiting them, their officers visiting us, I think it would help. Just look at the China border. Why are things so calm? Because there is a system of very regular border meetings. In 1 year that I was there, we had almost 50 meetings on the border in Ladakh, which means once a week we were meeting. So all these things I think help. So
talking about China, is Pakistan the bigger threat for us, or is China the bigger threat really?
Let's not talk about threats. The fact is...
okay, let's say challenge then.
Yeah. China certainly is the bigger challenge. It's a much larger country, much better military, very well developed infrastructure on their side. And the fact is that you have an undecided border. So there is always a flashpoint. And we've seen these flashpoints happening at Chumar and Doklam, etc. There is also a strategic competition that is taking place, Indian Ocean, South Asia, between India and China. So I would say in the long term, even in the short term, frankly now, the bigger challenge is certainly China.
Ever since Wuhan, do you believe that relations between India and China have turned for the better?
See, Wuhan is good because prime ministers and premiers meet and talk peace. I would say let's take a long-term perspective. We sometimes tend to take individual incidents and they somehow start defining our overall relationship. So you take Doklam and say things are getting very bad, and then suddenly Wuhan and they say things are getting very good. I'm saying a long-term consistent kind of approach will actually tell us whether the trajectory in which we are going is good or not. Because you talk to Wuhan, suppose there's Doklam too, then suddenly we'll say things are very bad. So it's better to take a long-term perspective and see how relationships are growing.
Before I let you go, a couple of quick questions. Firstly, your thoughts on AFSPA. Do you believe that it's time for AFSPA to go, or should it remain? People are calling it draconian and whatnot.
Yeah. So people are calling it it's a draconian act, and the point is, if you want the army to operate in an area, it has to be covered under AFSPA. There is no other law under which it can be covered. The army is not meant to operate in internal security, and that is why when it goes into internal security role, you empower it by AFSPA. I think the larger question we must ask ourselves is the army required in the northeast and Jammu and Kashmir? And if we say we think the army's role is done and it can pull out, then AFSPA will automatically go. But as long as the army is there, I see no other option. Otherwise, you cannot legally operate in those areas.
The other aspect is the fact that army men have individually gone to courts regarding AFSPA. Your thoughts on that?
I think it's an unfortunate happening. There are genuine concerns that these officers have. And why I say it's unfortunate is because I think this was something that the government should have done. If soldiers are worried about protection while operating in defense of the country, I think it's not right that individual officers go to court. The government should step in, see if there is a legislation required, see if something new is required. But it's the government's responsibility to fight for the soldier and not individual soldiers to fight for themselves. And it's in that context I say it's unfortunate. I don't say that they're wrong in going. But I don't think it's good for the country.
And you're a hero to all of us and the nation. So it's only apt that I ask you to leave us with a message to the nation.
Well, firstly, let me say, the real heroes are the guys who went across the line of control and actually did the surgical strike, because they were carrying the country's hopes actually basically on their shoulders, and they put their lives on line. So they are the real heroes. My message to the country is, have faith and confidence in your army.
We do. We all do. And we look at the army with a great deal of respect.
Yeah. And what keeps us going is also the love and respect of the countrymen. So just continue to do that, and we in the army will make sure that you are safe.
General, a pleasure and an honor to have you on the program. Thank you so much for giving us your time to be on To The Point.
Pleasure.
All right, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of To The Point. See you again next time.